I am unbelievably, and you'll know why in a minute. I'm really honored, and I'm going to embarrass our guest today a little bit. He's a baker extraordinaire. Okay, he's an entrepreneur. We'll hear all about that. But you know what? He's a phenomenal person. Andy is a good friend. He's just a great, great person. And we've known each other for a little bit of time now, probably about 5 years or so. Actually, my home is about 2.7 miles, but who's counting? From Andy's temple. We call it Moxie Bread Company. And I'll get to Andy in a minute, I promise. But I would be remiss if I didn't take a little bit of time to let you know that Andy is the owner, proprietor of the Moxie Bread Company in Louisville, Colorado. And I'm sitting in Boulder right now at our campus. Louisville is probably about 6 miles due east from here. Beautiful little community. And can I just say, it's so good. I mean, so good. And don't blush, Andy, but Moxie doesn't just offer amazing baked goods like croissants and bialys and tartines and salads and cookies, amazing breads and muffins. To me and my family, Moxie is so much more, right? It's a place for friends and community to gather. That's why we go to Moxie. It's Sunday morning with your family. It's Tuesday afternoon with a friend, right? It's a place, truthfully, it's a place that you always wanted to open for yourself, right? Old historic building. I'll leave some of that for Andy. Really, really amazing. It's a place where everybody knows your name, right? Like Cheers. I had to say that. Andy's also the proprietor of the Mill Site, which is a new wholesale and retail grain mill in North Boulder, which is actually closer to us, right up the road here, or Nobo as we call it. And he'll talk about that a little bit in a bit as well. I have to mention too that Andy works really closely with Colorado Grain Chain, which is a nonprofit organization, really focused on expanding and promoting locally grown heirloom grains. And that's really kind of the theme for today. I can't wait to hear more, or for you to hear more about that. So you heard a little bit of banjo already. So without any further ado, Andy, I just want to say thanks so much for allowing us to, sort of be your soundtrack this afternoon, if you will. Okay. So how the heck are you?
I'm great. And thank you so much for having me and including me and offering me this opportunity to speak to 71 participants at my favorite culinary school in America. Just to kind of love on Escoffier for a minute. I've hired a lot of people through the years, and from some very big fancy schools and some from very homegrown environments as well. And the caliber and the quality and the willingness to kind of work and the dedication that we get from folks from Escoffier is bar none. So hats off to you guys, and congratulations for being on the winning team and for winning your prestigious award of best culinary school.
Awesome. Thanks for saying that. I wanted to. I've got all kinds of questions, but because of the banjo and a little bit of jam in there at the beginning, we all know that chefs and food people, right, are artists, right? So it makes total sense that there's a little music in the background there. Talk to us about that. What's the connection, right?
When I was working in restaurants and bakeries growing up, I knew early on that I wanted my own place. I think we kind of all do, right? If you're getting into the industry and you have the opportunity to work in some inspiring places, a lot of it boils down to the group of people that you get to work with every day and the community that you get to serve. But my trajectory took me through 15 years of working in a corporate space where I wasn't bringing my banjo to work. I wasn't my get show. I wasn't bringing my kids weren't running into the pastry room, Dad, can I shape a croissant? And I had this idea for this bakery literally for 20 years. And that bakery was not just a place that you'd get a croissant and a cup of coffee and you'd walk away. It'd be a very inclusive space, a third place where, you know, a group could come and do, you know, Bible study in the corner, as happens a fair amount. People could come and bring, you know, a new mom group. We have a big sand pit behind the bakery, which has been a key to success in a small family-oriented town. Is, you know, you show up with your kids and they're going nuts, and you kind of want to have a coffee or a glass of wine and enjoy your conversation with your friend Kirk, but your kids are going berserko. And we have this big sand pit, and you just pre-COVID let your kids go and be wild in the sand pit and enjoy your food in your afternoon. But you know, the music's a big part of my life. My father's a professional musician. My grandmother was a professional musician. She played the bells in church towers, the carillon, kind of an unconventional thing. But I grew up with food. I grew up with a strong sense of family pride, and music. So thinking about what my little bakery would be whenever I opened it, it was going to have community, poetry, music, food, and in an inclusive environment through the customer service element, both that I would bring to the table and that our staff would, you know, would represent. And so it's your dream, right? It's your dream. So, you know, flesh it out and get all those little things that make you happy. You know, music makes me happy. I've got guitars hanging in the dining room, and customers will come in and pick up a guitar and pick a little bit. We've got famous musicians or people will roll through, and somebody will say, "Hey, do you know who's sitting in the table near the window?" And I'll go over and I'll be, "Wow," you know, and then I'll get all shy and say, "I don't want to play, but you should play, and I'd love to hear you." So it's, you know, to Kirk's point, it's not just a bakery. It's a place to be, and it's a place to, you know, commune with your friends and stuff, with a very serious focus on high quality baked goods.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It creates a beautiful ambience, right? So let's take a step back. 15 years with Whole Foods. But let's go back further, you know, for the students. You went to Europe for a bit. Talk a little bit about that experience and why.
Yeah, sure. You know, I've always been a food lover, and I remember at one point in high school, you know, finding, I think it was Trader Joe's, and finding they were importing a type of brie, and I started buying some baguettes from them, and you know, I was working a job. I had some spending money, and I would go shopping on my own to Trader Joe's. My mom would go do the family shop and get the chicken and the milk and stuff, and I would come back with fancy food. And you know, it should also be stated that I was pretty skinny kid up until the point where food blew my mind, and I got so excited about food. And you know, I would watch cooking shows. At that time, it was Jacques Pepin, The Galloping Gourmet, and Julia Child. And when every other little kid was watching the Red Sox, I was watching, you know, cooking shows. We took a trip to Austria in high school, and I'd saved up all my money, and we were walking by this amazing little Austrian pastry shop. And I looked in the window and I saw one of these cheese strudel, and it was closed, or they were closing. And I said, I'm gonna get up early tomorrow morning and, you know, go and do that. So I woke up at 6 a.m, went down, found the baker poking around there, bought one, snarfed it down, bought a second one. The third one was a mistake, and I'll spare you the gory details. But let's just say I was very enthusiastic about you know, mostly kind of European and heavy influence in French and German baked goods early on. I had an opportunity to work at a small co-op in my hometown of coastal Massachusetts that sold macrobiotic foods and you know, healthy, wholesome vegetarian foods, and also some artisan bread. So in high school, as a prep cook, dishwasher, you know, kind of all around kitchen handyman, I asked my boss, I said, gosh, that bread seems super cool and kind of mystical. And I don't know, kind of feeling it, more than this carrot chopping, cutting 200 pounds of carrots or potatoes a day. And I said, can I learn more about that? And he said, sure. You come in off the clock on your own dime at 4 a.m, and you can watch me and you can observe, and maybe you'll pick something up. And so that was, I think, as a freshman in high school. So my weekends and my summers were spent working at that restaurant. And I started to get really obsessed with pizza and breads. And at that time, they weren't the artisan breads that we know today. It was more, kind of poofy generic Italian or generic French bread. But it parlayed as an 18-year-old into finding a bakery in Boulder when I landed in Boulder that had just opened. That was a really sort of cutting edge new take on a very old school European baking concept. And I got my foot in the door, and I was so excited about being a bread baker, but I didn't really have the chops to do it. And the handful of bakers that were working there were very highly trained artisan bakers, trained in sourdough fermentation and hand forming breads, and deck ovens with steam injection. And I was kind of coming from a little rinky-dink kitchen. So they said, baker my butt, you're, looks like you have some coffee skills. You can go be a barista. So jumped on board as a barista. And this is in Boulder, Colorado in the 90s. And Boulder is a bit of a high turnover place with a lot of folks, sort of transient community. Folks come for a week and then they move up to go climbing up in the mountains or skiing or cycling. And I was noticing a lot of turnover on the baking crew. And so I'd be, making coffee, looking over, hey, if you ever need a hand with that whole bread thing, I'm really into it. I know I'm 18, but I'll be your guy. I'll be your huckleberry. And sure enough, 3 months in, a baker flaked out and called out sick. And they said, all right, you Clark, jump in. And I jumped in. And, after about a year of that, I proved myself and I got promoted to a supervisor job, and then an assistant head baker job, and then became head baker, within a 4-year time period. So, I think, persistence is often one of the strongest skills that you can possess in this industry.
Yeah, I just love the, and I'm sure everybody's enjoying this. It's like story time for me. Andy can just tell a story, but the moral of the story there, right, is persistence, right? You stuck with it. You stuck with your dream. So let's, are you comfortable bringing up the slides, Andy?
So we'll, let me just see if I can get my screen share going here.
Yeah.
Let me know when you see it.
There we go. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about Moxie a little bit, but it'd be really cool. I mean, we've got so many questions, but, just the way you sort of kind of walk through it is so comfortable. Let's talk about the local farmers that are your friends, and let's talk about, your passion about grinding your own grain, and maybe let's talk about the grain chain a little bit in any order that you want while
Sure.
you're kind of sharing some of the great photos.
So our I'll take it sort of from I think we'll start at the business. You guys send in some really, really good thought-provoking questions, and I want to address some of those specifically, and I oriented my slides to that end a little bit here. So we've been in business for 5 years, and I had been at the end of a 15-year career running a 30,000 square foot commissary for Whole Foods that was running all of the bread and pastry for the Rocky Mountain region and shipping par bake frozen or fully finished frozen slack and serve bread and pastry to, kind of far and wide throughout the United States. And I had just always wanted to be back in that little bakery where I came from. And I learned so much. I learned so much working for Whole Foods Market. I learned so much growing into a role of, managing a 30,000 square foot shop that ran 24/7, that had quite a bit of automation, over 150 employees. But I always just, closed my eyes at night and I dreamed about something that looks a lot like this photo that you can see. And I should also say that all of the skills that I picked up working at Whole Foods, this is back in 1992, 3, 4, I thought computers were silly. I had no reason to use one, this wasn't my thing. I was an artist. And I didn't really use a computer functionally on a daily or weekly basis until Whole Foods Market. I never knew how to use an Excel spreadsheet or create a Word. I could do a Word document, but didn't know how to, work with people. I was kind of headstrong and, I thought I was the best baker I'd ever met in the world. Everyone should just watch me and didn't have a lot of patience for people, if somebody wasn't doing it right, I would be pretty apt to, make a pointed remark and sort of, maybe passive aggressive or let's just say not constructive, right? You're trying to teach somebody something. What I now know is there's a really constructive way to do it, and you can do it with some discipline and with some authority, but it doesn't have to be at the tip of a spear. But as a young kid, before I got to have all the experience of managing and hiring and firing and promoting and transferring thousands of people, didn't really know, how to work with people, to be honest with you. Keeping a set of financials, looking at food cost and labor, your overhead. As a small business owner, that's kind of how you survive, right? The attrition rate pre-COVID of somebody just opening a restaurant and having a successful long career, is not always the best. So the preparation that you can get on somebody else's dime, you get hired at the Four Seasons and you get to spend a decade, learning their ways. That is invaluable. So nonetheless, when I left Whole Foods, I was petrified of opening a little corner bakery. And I was just, shaking in my boots and I don't know how I'll ever do this. Opened it, it was successful, it worked. My friends laughed later and said, Andy, I know you were kind of freaking about it, but we were all thinking like, gosh, he's done one thing his whole life, which is bake bread and run bakeries. I'm pretty sure he can open a corner bakery and succeed. But I think it's good to have that, to be aware that it may not succeed. So just the question that was emailed in from one of you guys or gals was, do you have any advice on opening your own business? And my advice is get a lot of experience out there. Don't be afraid to, wait the extra year or two underneath the wing of a seasoned pro, and then do the math and run a business pro forma and write down your menu, right? You're going to make croissants and coffee and baguettes. Okay, well, how many are you going to sell per day? How many are you going to sell per hour? How many people do you need sitting there selling them per hour? What does that all equate to? Okay, maybe it's $2,000 a day. Okay, what's your rent? What are you paying yourself or your manager? Well, when you start with your sales, $2,000, and you subtract your rent and your labor and this and that, if that number that you arrive at is a negative number, that may not be a good business plan. And it feels a lot better to modify and change your business plan when you're sitting in front of a computer than it does when you're paying rent and paying payroll. So there's that. So this is the outside of my little dream bakery, Moxie Bread Co. We have music. We continue to have music. Now it's on a balcony, so it's more COVID safe, but we have bands play there 1 or 2 days a week. Hold on here. Let me just figure out how to flick to the next photo. This is the inside of the bakery. So behind my 2 little kids there, you can see that is a traditional Italian steam tube deck oven. We only have 1 oven for everything: pastry, grilled cheese, roasting chicken, bacon, and bread. It works, you know. It's also the centerpiece of the bakery. So you can see the espresso machine there, and you know, as you walk in, you see us, you know, making bread, and I think that's a really, really critical component. And a lot of bigger box operations know that, you know, the Paneras of the world and the Safeways of the world and so forth. And to create that intimacy is priceless. And people love to see us do our thing. They talk to us a lot. There's a very intimate connection. The staff really enjoys, you know, mingling with our customers. So, you know, you're pulling something out of the oven and somebody says, "Ooh, is that a, you know, a Castrovetana Meyer lemon, you know, fougasse?" You're like, "Yeah, I just, you know, hold on, I'll put some oil and some salt on it, and here, I'll pass it to you fresh." I mean, Kirk, I think I've passed you burning hot stuff on more than one occasion, to a chuckle and a giggle and a smile. We're going to move into the kind of milling and the grain part here. And again, you know, when I dreamed up my little dream bakery, like I said, it had music and community and family, you know, where we live 6 blocks away. And I try to include my kids in as much as I can. And boy, do they love it, you know. The little guy who's getting a noogie, that's Max. He's 10 years old. When we opened, he was 5 years old. And I would get in my truck, my delivery truck, in the month that we were building the bakery out. I'd fire it up at like 4 in the morning, big loud diesel truck. And I'd look at the door of my house and my son would be sitting there in his skivvies, you know, "Dad, don't leave without me." And I'm like, "Gosh, it's like 4 or 5 in the morning. You got to go back to bed." So he would jump in the truck and he would come down and he would help paint the building and put up sheetrock and install the oven. And he knows that bakery, you know, like the way you know your backyard, you know, and he's very comfortable in there and everybody loves it when he comes in. They are sitting on a tote of wheat. So a tote is one big bag that holds about 2,000 pounds. And a lot of the farmers will process grain into those totes. There's a couple slips on the top that you can put a forklift through, and you can lift it up, and there's a little opening in the bottom that you can let the wheat trickle out the bottom into your flour mill. So that's a tote of Rouge de Bordeaux wheat, organic Rouge de Bordeaux. This is one of our small mills. This is an Austrian mill, and in there is a really beautiful native corn called Pink Lady Seneca from New Mexico, Four Corners area. And you can see it spilling out in that little white bucket, kind of a gorgeous pink. You know, corn is an entire rabbit hole to fall into. It's sort of like when you discover wine or jazz music, or some sports where you know, you realize you could spend the rest of your life exploring you know, one certain kind of wine from one region of the world. You know, corn has sustained humanity back to indigenous times in the Americas, and has such a rich history. It's woven into the creation story of the Hopi and many different indigenous tribes. I was reading a book that was talking about the ants moving the corn, and that I think the ants were some form of the Great Spirit, or God, and the corn was the people, and the ants were planting the people. But that story dates back thousands of years, and corn has been really abused in the U.S. through genetic modification and heavy pesticide application and monocropping. And I think, if I said, hey guys, what do you think about corn? My guess is that most of you are like, high fructose corn syrup, fuel, excess subsidies, and maybe have a not at first positive connotation of corn. I don't know. It's either white or yellow in our supermarkets. We all probably love cornbread and maybe polenta. Certainly the Italian love of corn is high, but it's been a recent epiphany for me that all of these native corns have their own story and their own place, and then tons of flavor. So at that restaurant, Tammy, in Austin called Suerte, they get their grain from Barton Springs and Dripping Springs, and they nixtamalize it in-house. So the process of nixtamalization being doing a hot water soak with a really alkaline material, lime, natural limestone. It softens up the husk. It makes the starch more bioavailable, and it makes the corn masa, once you grind it, more pliable and elastic, so that when you take a tortilla and you fold it to put some barbacoa in the middle, it doesn't snap. But it makes the flavor and the aroma just come through the roof. So if anybody is interested in exploring more corn, do a little Google research on nixtamalization. Again, a process that dates back to the Aztec time. Another one of my boys, that's Theo. I only have 3 for the record. That's an old flour mill there. That mill is from 1917, made in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. Those guys have been making mills for 150 years. I picked that up 5 years ago before we opened Moxie in California. I drove out in my Tacoma to pick it up, brought it back to Moxie, and it wouldn't fit through the door. Nor would the electrical motor work on my lower electrical. We work in this little old house from the 1880s, and there was nowhere to plug it in. It didn't fit in the front door. It sat in a storage unit. Well, no, it sat in my garage for 2 years, holding up my kids' ski jackets, until my wife finally let me know that it wasn't fun to have that in the garage where her car should be, and had it in a friend's storage for a few years. And then my executive chef came to me about a year ago and said, Andy, we mill flour in our small mill every day. You've got a collection of mills and storage units. What's it going to take for you to muster the gumption to, open up a little mill? I mean, who else is going to do it? If you don't do it, so we ended up finding a spot up in Boulder that had the correct electrical. It had a big enough door to get the mill through. And somewhat ironically, right in the middle of the pandemic, we opened a flour mill in Boulder. And so the mill is taking regional grain. So maybe it's Nebraska, Kansas, North and South Dakota, and Colorado grain, both wheat, rye, spelt, and corn, and buckwheat, and grinding it into flour. And we sell that flour both to customers in little 3-pound bags, like you'd get at a King Arthur product or General Mills. And then we sell bulk 50-pound bags to restaurants, pizzerias, cafes, and bakeries. And the hope is that there's been, we have this group we call the Colorado Grain Chain. And the grain chain is comprised of local farmers and food makers and various people who are passionate about the local food economy. And we're trying to connect all the dots to get farmers locally to plant some of these older wheat varieties and to plant them in a regenerative way, in an organic farm system or a regenerative agricultural system. We're trying to support that. A farmer can grow it, but what do they do with it next? You know, farmers are not always the best at, nor should they be, at connecting all the dots to the consumer. So we open the mill to be the next link in that chain. And there's another link that we're working on, which is the harvesting and cleaning. When the grain comes off the field, it needs to be cleaned to take the stones out, and there's a lot of husks in there and other seeds that shouldn't be in there. So we're working on growing that grain chain, and this year there's about 15 farms, a lot of them in Boulder and Weld County, and some in other parts of the state, a lot in eastern Colorado as well, that have a wheat harvest that's going to come off here this week, next week, and the week after, depending on your elevation and orientation within the state. Another mill. This mill on the right is the exact same mill as the one on the left. The one on the left is from 1917, June of 1917 to be specific, and the one on the right is from 1985. So it's funny when I call this guy, Brian, who works at Meadows Mill in North Carolina. I've been calling him for years, and he remembers me. He remembers the mills I have. And, you know, we pick up the conversation from a year or two ago. He says, oh, how did it go pulling that bearing on your 20-inch mill? And I said, oh, it worked out. You know, you had great advice, you know. And he's like, okay, well, call me if you ever need me, and I'll call back. And again, same guy. I mean, that's kind of cool, right? So you want to mill at home. This is called a mock mill. These are made in Germany, and it's the equivalent of, you know, we all went out and bought a Vitamixer after we saved up for a year when we saw the cost, but we all went and bought a Vitamix when they came out because there's never been a better blender, right? And it was worth every penny. The mock mill is the Vitamix of mills. This particular model retails for between $500 and $700. They make a cheaper one that you can pick up for $200 or $300. And this one, I don't know if you can see, it says mock mill Lino 200. 200 is 200 grams of flour per minute. 200 grams of flour per minute is pretty good. It's way more than you would need to feed a family of 12 pizza every night. And on the top, that lid comes off. That little hopper will hold about a half pound of grain. You put it in there, that whole top section rotates counterclockwise, and you can adjust your particle size. You can get it as fine as you possibly want, or you could just make cracked rye. You could crack buckwheat. We're going to use it to dehull einkorn. A local farmer came in last week and said, I just planted a bunch of einkorn, but I don't know how to get it out of the hull. You know, a lot of the wheat that we eat is free threshing. So it knocks from the husk. It'll just come shaken loose if you shake it a little bit. But emmer, einkorn, and spelt, and a lot of barley are not free threshing. So you need to scalp it, and you need to put it through a dehuller. And so this little mock mill functions as a dehuller as well. So you can find them, you know, mockmill.com. There's a U.S. representative that sells them, which is where you'll be redirected. They're called Breadtopia, and they've got one of the best resources for other baking supplies that are very specific to artisan baking. So this is my friend Matt. 5 years ago, the founder of the Colorado grain chain, Mona Esposito, wonderful woman who's very fanatical about the health attributes of fresh grains, ancient and heirloom grains, and whole grains, right? Most of us know that the nutrient density of white flour is non-existent. And all of the good stuff is found in the bran and the germ, which is what in America we've been sifting off and feeding pigs for 100 years. Mona, in her pursuit of, in her personal grainaissance, like a little squirrel, she went and took these little nuts, these little seeds, and she dispersed them all over Boulder County. And she went to local farmers that were, a lot of them were involved in the local food scene. You know, this farm, for example, services some of the best restaurants in Boulder, including Frasca and other award-winning restaurants. And she asked them if they would consider making, planting a grain crop. And most of them, you know, were kind of skeptical. They're kind of produce farmers. And this guy, Matt, and his boss, Jason, said, well, you know, maybe we'll do it. She said, well, what if I give you the grain for free, right? And they said, all right, we'll do it. So they planted a couple acres 5 years ago. It came up beautiful, and they brought it to the farmer's market, and it sold like hotcakes. And so they planted again the next year, and the next year, and the next year. They now have, I want to say 5 acres of 4 different varieties of wheat in the ground. We got some of their wheat last week and some of their blue emmer, and it's now at Dio Mio Pasta in Denver, Stowaway in Denver, and a few other shops, Audrey Jane's Pizza. Some really good restaurants are featuring it. And, you know, you think about going to the farmer's market, you get an heirloom tomato, pretty cool. You put it on your menu. You get local baby kale. That's pretty inspiring. If you're in Austin, you're probably getting some regional pecans, and you're in California, you're getting some amazing citrus. But have you ever gone to your farmer's market and been able to purchase local grain, you know, from a field that you can point to? I know I hadn't until recently, and it's pretty exciting to be a part of this growing network. So that's it. That's called a seed drill. It's a seeder. He's pouring grain in there, and he'll pull that behind his tractor, and that tractor will has these little pointed, hollow-tipped seed drills that drag about a ½ inch under the ground. You can see near his toe is a chain. There's a bunch of chains behind there, and those chains kick the dirt back over the seed because you want the seed to be not exposed. You want it to get some moisture and not to get eaten by all the blackbirds. This is a real shot. That is the way that dude looks. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Andre Husney. And he's got a beard that just won't quit. I don't even know how he does it. But that is also a seeder. That's a seed drill behind him, over 100 years old from John Deere. And you can see that corrugated metal behind the wrench in her hand. And that's Joan. She's our baker and head. On the back side of that corrugated metal is an old farmer who took notes of how many pounds of seed he planted per acre and on what field. So, you know, we were looking through all these cursive pencil scribbles, and it says, you know, 1947, 4 acres of barley on the south field at 20 pounds per acre. So kind of cool. We worked on that for 2 weeks, got it all lubed up and greased, and you can see beneath his knee is a newer piece of wood. We carved that, we traced that off the old oak yoke, got all rigged up, pulled it, and the axle twist and it broke, and it now is still in that same spot, rusting in the field, but he bought a new one. So this is Aspen Moon again. This is Matt, who was in the first photo. He planted this last fall. I went and visited him late in the fall. You've got two ways to two types of wheat planting wise: fall planting and spring planting. A lot of what the farmers out here do is a fall planted wheat. You put the wheat in the ground sometime in August or September. It stays underground dormant, not a ton of rain happening out here. And then when the snow falls, it germinates and it will sprout a small head usually. The winters have been kind of wild and kind of hot and have been doing weird things to plants, but it'll sprout and then it will vernalize. It will go to sleep for the winter and it will lay under the snow and be insulated by the snow. In the spring, that moisture will melt. All of these seeds come back to life, which is, kind of a miracle and amazing to watch happen. And kind of nerve-wracking, but it, pretty much works every time. And then you get this in the spring. So you can see this little baby sprout. That was in February when it was starting to get some warm days. And then this is about a month ago. Same guy, Matt. Now we're in the COVID world, so he's got his mask on, but that's his wheat field. These guys are biodynamic, so they incorporate Rudolf Steiner's principles of farm management and preparation, and a lot of that includes using livestock. So it's bison or cattle. Bison have a certain cloven hoof that has sort of a tilling effect when they walk on the prairie, and they'll eat all the grass and the straw. After, you wouldn't let the bison out on a fresh field, you'd let it out when you cut it, and they feed on it. They fertilize it with their poop, and then they knead it into the ground. They manage where the bison go in which field, depending on what they're trying to do. You don't want them out there when it's really wet and muddy, because they could actually, dig trenches in the soft soil. They don't like them on really hard pan stuff because it compacts it. So they kind of move them methodically throughout the year. Same farm. This is rye. So he actually put this in as a cover crop. And again, Joan, our head miller there, you can see it's she's not quite 6 feet tall, but see how high it is. It's beautiful. So this is a mixture of rye and a wheat that he's probably going to plow under as green manure as a cover crop. We're going to, in France, they'll take some rye and wheat blends and use them in certain breads. So we're going to try to get a little bit of it, but I think he's going to plow the rest of it under. Let's see if we can start a video. So if you've ever had the experience of being out in a wheat field in the wind, it's pretty profound. To me, it feels like being on the ocean, being on the shore and looking out at sea and seeing the swells and the heaves, and kind of you let it sort of take your worries away a little bit, and you surrender to the great sea. Well, this is the sea of wheat. These are 2 acres that we have planted in partnership with a farm up in Boulder. So let's see if this will work. Right, pretty cool. That swirling is kind of a trip. I've been bringing out friends, and we're doing kind of harvest tours and walking through the wheat, and it's pretty cool. There's a farmer named Eric Skoken up in Boulder who also owns a restaurant called Black Cat. And Eric went from being a fine dining chef to being a farmer in this past decade, and he keeps over 500 acres of pasture, mostly to raise sheep and some pigs. And then he's got about 8 acres on his sort of homestead farm right behind, where he lives, that he does farm dinners and grows produce. And he doesn't buy any meat for his restaurant, and it's very lamb centric, and also very kind of vegetarian centric as well through stuff that he grows. But he was kind enough to let us plant on his property, and we have a lot in common. We get pretty excited about stuff like grain blowing in the wind. So if you're ever in Boulder, he's just firing up his restaurant series again at Black Cat Farm, doing farm dinners.
Where are we here, Andy, just for the crowd there?
So that is North Boulder. That is J Road and 63rd. So
All right.
anybody who lives locally, you're also welcome to go take a walk in that field. Black Cat Farm has a farm stand on the corner there as you enter the Boulder Reservoir. Can't miss it. And you look out to your left and you'll see this big old field of wheat. Now it's yellow and not green, but you can park your car and go walk out in the field. You don't need any permission to do it.
And that's facing the west, everybody. There you can see the mountains there. That's probably, what do you think, 4 miles from where the school is, right? Right,
Yep.
right down the road.
Yep.
And, the true farm to table experience. I absolutely love it.
And we've got some of this grain with your name on it, Kirk, too. So you're gonna get some hyper local wheat. This is cool. So this is called Ethiopian blue tinged emmer. You can see it's sort of green at the bottom, and it's sort of getting purplish blue on the top. A week before I took this photo, this was all green, and it just blues up towards the end. And then the wheat kernels on the inside, the emmer kernels, have a really dark tinge to them. Kind of cool. We like to use it for, it's not great for bread making. It doesn't have a lot of dough strength and gluten strength, but it's great for making cookies and pie doughs and anything that doesn't need to form a strong gluten bond. This old beauty, that's a seed cleaner. This is called a clipper, and a clipper is sort of like what Ford is to American auto industry. The clipper is to the wheat cleaning world in America. This thing shakes and shimmies. There's belts moving everywhere. And this is at Eric's farm. This is how we clean our wheat. Moving back to corn for a minute here. Before the pandemic, we had planned on making our new flour mill in North Boulder a sort of a bulk department. And we wanted folks to come in and bag up stuff in bulk like you would at your grocery store. But then we have all those grinders, those mock mills, and you could grind your stuff fresh. It's not safe for people to be touching and scooping all this raw material, so now we do it for them. But really beautiful display of, those are African baskets, and those are actually Mexican pots from the Tarahumara in Mexico, and they have a very similar pot in Taos, New Mexico. So at some point, we'll be displaying it like that and letting people reach in with metal scoops and fill up as much as they want. But look at the colors. I mean, it is mind-boggling. That really dark purple one in the kind of middle left. On the far right it's called Oaxacan green. Really beautiful. We got that from Barton Springs is having that grown from down there. And so what we've been doing locally is that when a farmer wants to grow wheat, we give them the seed for free. And I ask that they return the same quantity of seed at harvest. And then I keep my seed fresh. And I also have the advantage of, one more year of regional adaptation of that seed. And the stuff that doesn't grow well out here, we don't grow again. The stuff that's winter hardy, high yield, doesn't lodge, doesn't blow over in the wind, isn't susceptible to a myriad of pest and weed and fungal pressures. That's the stuff we keep planting. There was a question from one of y'all about what's my favorite wheat. We've been using Turkey Red, Turkey Red is a variety brought to America from Crimea in the 1840s when the Mennonites were fleeing persecution, and they ended up in Kansas. And the story that I've heard firsthand from a Mennonite friend in Kansas is that his great-great-grandfather, came over with a beautiful big sort of Bolshevik beard and a looked very old-fashioned, and he had stitched into his clothing some of this wheat, and he knew that this wheat had sustained his people in the Ukraine and Crimea, and it originally came from Turkey for thousands of years, and they knew, hey, we're going to go make a new start, and this wheat will sustain us. And they planted it, and at one point at the turn of the century, there was over 1 million acres planted up here in the High Plains region. Now it's down to less than 1,000, and we actually buy the majority of that from 2 farms in western Kansas. So it's called Turkey Red. Typically a higher protein, 12 to 14% protein wheat, a strong whole wheat flavor. Those tannins in the wheat bran that give that reddish brown color are pronounced. It is a wheat lover's wheat. If it was a beer, it would be more like an IPA and less like a Pilsner. Part of the beauty, I'm gonna go back to the wheat photo here. Part of the beauty in selecting what wheat to use for what application is there are hundreds of varieties. There are dozens of varieties available to us almost all throughout the US. There are groups forming left and right that are doing what we're doing in Colorado. There's the Main Grain Alliance if you're up in New England or North Atlantic. There's the California Grain Campaign doing great stuff in California. There is, I think it's called the Artisan Bakers Cooperative in Chicago area. There's an Appalachian, not food bank, but a group down there. There's just tons of stuff. So I got to have dinner with Nancy Silverton, one of my heroes, at Frasca in Boulder a couple years ago. And we're at a table with 20 people and Bobby Stuckey, the owner, and everybody's wanting to chat to Nancy, and I said, hey Nancy, I'm Andy. I made the bread tonight, and kind of a bread geek and a wheat nerd. Nancy, what do you think about heirloom grains and all the variety we have? And she looked at me. She's a very, very gracious woman, and she said, "Oh, honey, I don't know. At La Brea, in the 80s, you got what they gave you, and it was white flour or wheat flour, and there was really nothing else. Maybe rye, but nobody really ate rye in America in the 80s. So she said, but I think it's wonderful that there are so many choices now. And even 10 years ago, when I think back on what I would formulate a new recipe with, I would think about, I'm kind of a purist, or have been a purist with ingredients. I want to create flavor through fermentation, through temperature control, through adjusting, the pH and the activity of my sourdough starter. And I, was staying away from adding butters or fats or oils or flavors, and just, a lot of old bread nerds just want to take, a little bit of barley, a little bit of wheat, and maybe a seed or two, and try to make a good tasting loaf without needing to color it with a lot of stuff. When chocolate cherry bread came out, a lot of us were like, oh, that's a major violation. That's like a international violation of the sweet savory line, but that's changing now, because you can, when I formulate a recipe, I can add spelt, I can add blue emmer, I can add, there's a whole slew of white wheat varieties that are intact whole grain, but the exterior bran is a very light color. It's white. You can grind that up and you can sneak it into, a hamburger bun and make a healthy hamburger bun. Let's see what else I got here for slides. So, and we're getting close to the end here, but COVID. So we navigated the COVID storm, the first round of it, by adding different items to our menu. I think that a lot of the folks who have survived this first onslaught of this pandemic did so through creativity and being dynamic and flexible. So 10 years ago, I would tell you, I'm Andy the bread baker. That's what I do. I'm so proud of it, And now I'm Andy the community maker, the food provider. I am not too proud to sell black beans and brown rice because the grocery stores are out. I'm not too proud. In fact, I should restate that. I'm very proud to sell butter and milk. We've been bringing in local farm fresh butter and milk and different cheeses. We have toilet paper on the menu. Daily special on Saturday. But we started doing take-home meal kits, lasagna, chicken pot pie, grilled chicken dinner, ribeye, and we just extended our categories in ways that our customers would support our customers. And so, a year ago, I was pretty much a bread and pastry coffee shop. Now my wife will text me at the end of my day and say, honey, don't forget, can you bring home some milk and butter? Oh, and some arugula. And I'll go into what's now sort of a mercantile, and I'll grab all the stuff, and we won't have to go to the supermarket for a day or two, and that's what we're trying to provide to our guests is options, because people don't really want to go, people are petrified of waiting in line at the supermarket and all that social interaction. So if they can get a cappuccino and a baguette and, oh gosh, you're out of butter and they're doing rice for dinner tonight, boom. So that's the COVID thing. So I will leave a little bit of room here for questions since I've talked for almost an hour straight.
Yeah, let me jump in, Andy. I hope everyone is enjoying this as much as I am. And keep in mind, Andy and I hang out. I just want to reiterate, everything that Andy's talking about is so special, right? I wish there were more Andys in the world, right? This connection with the farmers, and I'll tell you, he hasn't even started talking about the pizza, the amazing pizza dough and the pizza oven out in the back next to the sandbox. We hosted my wife's 40th birthday party there last year with 40 people and a bunch of pizza and just a really, really good time. Our kids are in Scouts together. I mean, this is the epitome of what you think about or dream about, right? I wanted to say thank you to sweet Tommy Beckman, one of our illustrious Escoffier instructors and baker extraordinaire, someone I've known for over 20 years. Thanks for sending out all those links to all the students. Breadtopia, Colorado Grain Chain, moxiebreadco.com. So much great information out there. Hang with us just for a couple of more minutes. I know it's been an amazing hour, but if we could just grab at least a couple student questions that popped in. Chef Bob is monitoring that. Bob, do you want to hit Andy with a question or two?
Sure. Yeah. Andy, it's great to have you. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Likewise.
A couple questions from some students. Is there such thing as a quick sourdough bread?
Not really. Nope. And, during the pandemic, I think everyone's been making more time for stuff. And, sourdough, it's sort of like, it's a process, and it takes learning. It takes time. I have a recipe that I can share for distribution of how to start a starter from scratch in your home kitchen in, I think it's a 7 or 8 day process. In fact, if you just go to my website on the FAQ section, it's there. But no, there's no shortcuts, and that's kind of the beauty of it. You got to commit. You got to commit to it.
Yeah, old school for sure, right? Speaking of pizza dough, there was a question from Nadia saying which flour is the best for pizza dough.
So, if you're talking to a guy from Naples, he'll tell you that the double O Italian Caputo or a similar, really pure, white, very, very fine flour is the best. And I've eaten a lot of good pizza in Italy and America with that flour. I think that flour has the ability to withstand really high temperatures. It seems to be one of its distinguishing characteristics, and it gives you that, what they call that leopard spotting, where you get that Maillard action of all these little stippled dark spots and that caramelized flavor of the starches. However, I'm trying to use stuff close to me. I cannot justify shipping flour from another country. When we sit here in the middle of the breadbasket in Colorado, in one of the biggest wheat producing countries in the world, we use an all-purpose flour that's made from heirloom wheat that's organic from Heartland Mill. It's called a Type 65. It's a slightly higher extraction, and it's delicious. We do an 8-hour fermented pizza dough. We mix it at 9 o'clock in the morning. We shape it into dough balls at noon. We let it sit at room temp for 5 hours, and then we start pulling pizza with it. Also happy to share that recipe.
Amazing. By the way, guys, when the recorded session lands on our website, we'll also add a signature cookie dish or recipe from Andy. That should be live by tomorrow that you guys can try out. I have one more thing for Andy, but Bob, any other questions that you want to throw out there for Andy?
There's a question from one of our pastry graduates, actually, regarding deck ovens versus revolving ovens.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that?
So like a revolving, like a Revent or a Hobart, revolving convection oven. It's hard to make bread in there because there's so much airflow, and it doesn't capture steam very well. Whereas a deck oven, most deck ovens don't have airflow inside the baking chamber. They're have a retained heat stone in there. Ours is about 1 inch thick, and there's steam injection. So we can inject steam in there, and that steam really helps to form that delicious, crust that you're looking for in an artisan bread. I've seen people make really good, bread in a convection oven. It takes a lot more work to pull it off.
Awesome. Let me jump in. Thank you, everybody, for hanging with us for over an hour. Andy, thank you so much. I've often heard you say it. I've seen it on your website. Bring us home with satisfy the soul and nourish the body.
Yeah, man. I think that's it's something I say a lot, partly because while we promote the use of whole grain and we promote healthy, alternative sugars and vegan and vegetarian food production, gluten-free inclusions, which I'm a huge fan of blending out. It doesn't have to be 100% gluten-free, but it would seem kind of clear we have overdone it in our wheat consumption. And so, incorporate a little bit of almond flour or chia or flaxseed meal into your sourdough and offset your wheat by 10 or 20 or 30%. I think you'll be healthier for it. So we focus a lot on the nutrient density of what we do, and we don't use artificial flavors or colors. We have no colors in the bakery at all that we don't derive from nature. But then we have our croissants and our kouign-amann and our prosciutto sandwiches. And I take great pride in watching people smile and giggle as they eat a buttery, sugary croissant. So I think that nourishes the soul, and I don't think you should ever get too far away from, remembering that, health food's great, but nothing wrong with it tasting really decadent sometimes too.
Well said, Andy. Will not argue there at all. Everybody at Escoffier, thank you so much. Let me take Andy off here so that you can say hi to everybody. Let's see some smiles, everybody. Thumbs up. Keep on baking. Usually I say keep on cooking, but this has really been a huge focus and so educational. Thank you. And again, the recording will be on the website by tomorrow. Andy, I'll call you later. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Kirk, thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you, Chef.
Be safe out
Thank
there.
you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.